Charlie, thanks for giving up time to come and join us today. I know you've been looking at 1 Corinthians. What has particularly stood out for you?
Yeah, thank you. One verse that's really stood out is chapter 1, verse 17. So Paul says, Christ didn't send me to baptize, but to preach the gospel, and not with words of eloquent wisdom, lest the cross of Christ be emptied of its power. And I just think that's terrifying, isn't it? That you think you could preach, you could try really hard, you could, I don't know, here in London maybe we could put on a mission for students, there could be lots of people there, or we get loads of people from the city in. It might even look like it had gone well, we'd have preached with eloquent wisdom, people would say thank you, but that the effect would be the cross of Christ is emptied of its power. Just think, saying that after a week of hard work, what we've done this week is empty the cross of Christ of its power, or what you've done in a lifetime has been emptied of power, empty the cross of Christ of its power. So I think that has stood out, and also because I think the reasons Paul's saying that are current ones, real ones for us. So the situation in Britain is that in general churches are getting smaller, Christians are small, isolated groups. Particularly, I work with students here in London, and most Christian unions are very small in kind of national terms, and are in big universities as a group of I don't know, 6 to 20 people, and the pressure to do something that looks good, something impressive, is huge. The danger is powerful, credible, wise in the world's terms, and so I think that's a real risk. So you think of something to say, and part of me likes it because I think it'll make the passage clearer and help people remember it and understand it. Part of me likes it because I think it'll make people laugh.
Why do you think there's increasing pressure for preachers to be more engaging and winsome as they teach God's word?
Yeah, so why do people want that? I think it's partly because we desperately want our friends to become Christians, and we can see that. You invite a Christian to a group of 8 people and they think this looks small and weak. We can see that if Christianity was the trendy thing to do, more people would come. And that's a right instinct, isn't it? And we want to make it as easy as possible for people to hear the gospel. We want to answer people's questions about the truth. If you watch Paul's ministry, you can see him arguing and persuading and taking apart people's wrong arguments. But the hard thing that's wrong with it is thinking, if we can just do this thing, if we can just find the thing that makes us impressive, find the thing that makes us credible, and then that will be good for the gospel. Whereas actually, in these verses, it says God's plan is to destroy the wisdom of the wise, and it says it's his plan to call, to choose what is foolish in the world, to shame the wise, and choose what is weak, to shame the strong. So it's deliberate in the gospel, in the dynamic of the gospel, that it looks weak, and even the sort of people God has chosen. So I think because Christian groups are quite a small bubble, we quite quickly look for the person who looks most impressive in that bubble, but actually in the world's terms, there's nothing impressive about any of us, and that's deliberate. If the total effect of what I'm doing is saying I'm clever, come and be clever with me, then I've actually destroyed the gospel and destroyed the cross, and that's a horrible thing.
How has 1 Corinthians been a good reminder to you as you preach through that series?
Yeah, so I think what Paul wants is for us to find power, if you like, and effectiveness in the right places. So he finishes up at the end of that bit of argument, chapter 2, verses 3 and 4. My speech and my message were not in plausible words of wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and of power, so that your faith might not rest in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God. And you might think we're back to signs and miracles, at least, with the demonstration of the Spirit and of power. But I think that the chapter 2 then goes on to tell you what the demonstration of the Spirit is. And it's an explanation of where Paul gets his wisdom from. So the Spirit teaches him what God has revealed. So the right place to have our confidence, the right place to think the power comes from, is the cross of Christ, the gospel message itself, and the Bible. So it's as that the Spirit has taught the apostles, and they impart this in words not taught by human wisdom, but taught by the Spirit. And the natural person doesn't accept them because they're folly to him, but the spiritual person does. So actually, what it means is I need to pray more than I need to try and work out brilliant arguments. Actually, what we're saying is the words that the Spirit gave the apostles, they're in the Bible for me to tell people. What I need to do is try and pass those on as clearly as I can and trust the Spirit to do his work convicting people. So maybe I'm speaking at a CU mission in London this year, and it may well be that most of that very impressive university will think we're small and weak and stupid. But actually, if I can teach them the words of the Spirit from the Bible, there will be some who will discern them, who will hear them, because the Spirit will work powerfully in them. And the hope is, the desire is that then they won't think their faith rests on the wisdom of man. So if I can think of some clever argument that answers someone's question, and they become a Christian because Charlie got that question right, they thought, and that is a very, very fragile place to rest. What if I was wrong? What if I was lying? What if they hear something else that kind of is cleverer later? Whereas if it actually works on, all he did was tell me what the gospel is, and the Spirit helped them understand that, and they think actually my faith rests on God's power on the cross. So it drives me back to say what I want to do is talk about the cross in all its weakness and all its foolishness. Clearly, persuasively, I hope, but then trust and pray and trust the Spirit to work through his word.
What does it feel like to preach just the gospel faithfully?
Yeah, I think then that will feel a lot less good, won't it? So Paul comes with weakness and fear and trembling. They prefer other preachers because they look more powerful, more impressive. And it, I think, will initially feel a lot less successful because people won't leave saying that was really wise or that was really good. They'll leave saying I can't accept the cross. Really early on, the Church of England was worried, I think, that I was too posh, and they said I had to do something raw and tough. And I think what they wanted me to learn was that you can't do the Bible everywhere, that you can't just explain the gospel, you have to do something else in different places. So they sent me, I've been working with teenagers somewhere quite posh in Wimbledon, and they sent me to work with homeless alcoholics. And actually what the year taught me was that people react in the exact same way to the gospel, wherever they are, whoever they are, whatever background they're from. So I shuttled during that year between doing Bible talks for guys straight off the streets and doing Bible talks to people out of one of the kind of poshest schools in southwest London. And you got the same reaction, couched slightly differently. So the teenagers would look bored, walk away, and not see you again, where the guys in the rehab would swear at you and tell you exactly what was wrong with what you'd said. But you also got the reaction from both groups of people who I thought this would all be rubbish, but I love what I'm hearing. The gospel is true, isn't it? And the cross is true. So it's not about can I keep up with what the world wants? Can I be persuasive and wise? And it's going to feel like being rejected a lot of the time. Feel like a lot of things are going wrong, I think. But over long term, seeing people become Christians and put their trust in God's power and God's wisdom, and therefore kind of armoured against, again, people you could send into a workplace where they're going to be the only Christian out of 300 and not look impressive. Whereas if someone becomes a Christian because you make it look impressive, then their whole Christian lives, they've got to stay where it's successful, it's impressive, it's going well. They've got to keep themselves away from people asking tricky questions because maybe it's not as wise and impressive as we thought it was. Whereas actually if you begin with just Jesus and his death, and I trust him because the Spirit has brought his words home, and then that's a robust, strong place to stand.
Charlie, you try to be an engaging preacher. Are you saying there's no room for illustrations or carefully phrased sentences?
No, I don't think I'm saying there's no place for it. I think I'm saying we should be worried about it, and we should think carefully why we're doing it. So there's nothing extra pious about being boring. So to take the cross of Christ and God's own Son dying to save us, and talk about that in such a way that it's dull and it's clear you're not excited about it, you don't think it's important, you don't think it's emotionally engaging. I don't think that's more faithful. You can see that Paul is not throwing away persuasion or rhetoric or illustration or argument. Even the bit where he's talking about this in 1 Corinthians 1, he's carefully structured, he's doing the best he can to explain something clearly. It's more the end product, and I think you'd see that over a period of time.
And when do we know that we've got it right, that we've just preached the faithful gospel?
Yeah, I think it's hard to know, isn't it, if you got it right. Paul says in chapter 4 that he doesn't judge himself. He doesn't want anyone else to judge him. He doesn't judge himself because there's a day coming when all our ministry will be judged, when Jesus comes back. And chapter 3 of 1 Corinthians talks about that day burning up what we've done, and only what was useful, what was built out of gold and silver will survive, and the wood and the straw will burn up. So in a sense, I don't think we want to be picking over our ministries endlessly and saying, oh, that was good, that wasn't, that was. You want to try and keep doing what the Bible tells us to do. And I guess that will feel like people having the reactions to us that they've always had to the gospel. So I think if someone says, you're a really rude, offensive person, I hate you, then maybe I'm doing something wrong in terms of not being winsome enough. But if they say, I hate God because of what God says, and I hate the idea of someone needing to die for me, I hate the idea of me having to believe in Jesus to be saved, then that may be that actually I've been rude, and I think that's worth checking, but it may just be they've heard the gospel and not liked it. Similarly, if people are saying thank you, the way they say thank you, that you've made it all fit together so clearly to me, or I can see now it all makes sense. Those are good things, aren't they? Praise God if it is the gospel that's making sense. But I'd want just to be, are you sure you've really heard what I've said? Actually, we're talking about a man dying on a cross because you needed rescuing from your sins so you don't go to hell. Do you realise that's what we've been saying? So clearly, can they understand, or are they just confused? And are they reacting positively and negatively to the gospel? Does someone say, Jesus is great, he died for me, I'm so glad you've told me what Jesus did, rather than God forbid, rather than you're great, or this preacher is great, or this explanation is great? That would be the worry.
Charlie, thanks very much for taking time out and joining us today.